everyone, and welcome to Harris County Public Library's monthly HCPL Writes program. My name is Elizabeth Boggs, and I'm the Assistant Branch Manager at the Catherine Tyra Branch Library at Bear Creek.
Hi there, and I'm Amy Campbell, the Branch Manager at the Catherine Tyra at Bear Creek Library and also an author. Today, Elizabeth and I have the pleasure of chatting with guest authors as we discuss morally great characters, what they are, and how the heck do you write a good one. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them as they come in.
Before we get into some Q&A, though, with today's guest authors about how to write morally great characters, we want to talk a little bit about what a morally great character is.
All right, so a morally great character is a character who is not totally good, but also not totally evil. So this is not going to be the antagonist of your story. They have positive traits, like they might be brave or extremely honest, but they also have prominent negative traits, such as greed or violence.
And if you're like me, you might be thinking, okay, give me some examples of these characters so I know who you're talking about. So examples of morally great characters in books include Severus Snape from the Harry Potter series, Kaz Brecker from Six of Crows, and even Jay Gatsby from The Great Gatsby. If you need a movie reference for a morally great character, though, just think of Tony Stark from the Avengers.
So morally great characters can be a lot of fun to add to a story because they introduce a level of unpredictability. You never know if they're going to hurt or help your protagonist. And if they are the protagonist, that causes even more problems for them.
And a lot of times when morally great characters are effectively written, the author is going to show the motivation of the character, even if that motivation spurs the character to less than ideal actions. And that motivation is going to show that the morally great character's actions are understandable. The morally great character's motivation is going to make sense, and it may even help create some empathy in the reader.
So now that we understand what a morally great character is, let's dive into how to write a good one. And for this part, as I said earlier, we're lucky to have some guest authors with us who have written morally great characters.
So let's hear from our guest authors as they introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their writing. First, we're going to kick it off with our very own author/presenter, Amy Campbell.
And I get to go first because it's alphabetical. So people don't think it's because, oh, she works for the library. So some of you already know me. I'm Amy Campbell, and I write fantasy with a Western twist. I'm trying very hard to make my own genre. So Western fantasy coming soon to a bookstore and library near you. I love writing about magical cowboys, and my third book is releasing in June.
Yay, awesome. And I know for our Harris County Public Library patrons, I do know for a fact that we have Amy Campbell's books in the library. So if you're looking for hers, stop by a Harris County Public Library location.
And we should have all the authors that are joining us tonight. If not physical copies, they should be available in Libby.
Perfect. Wonderful. I love to hear it. So now we're going to move to our first guest author from outside the library system. We're going to kick it off with Marlena Frank.
Hi, everyone. Wonderful to meet you guys. My name is Marlena Frank. I'm a young adult fantasy and horror author. I've written standalone novels, sweeping series, short story collections, everything in between. Basically, I write really character-focused stories set in immersive worlds. That's the kind of thing I love to write. And I do love my morally gray characters quite a bit.
Wonderful. I'm excited to hear more about the morally great characters you've written whenever we get to the Q&A. Next, we're going to introduce Lexi Ostro.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here and to talk with you all. I write romance pretty much in all of the genres, so anywhere from contemporary to Christmas, military, and then kind of the controversial high fantasy romance, which I know is getting a lot of love and hate right now. I love my morally gray characters, and I think what's more important is the books seem to love them too, because they seem to pop up more often than I have planned.
I hear that.
I've heard that writing characters has a way of doing that. They just kind of choose their own path there. And last but not least, our final guest author today is J.M. Wallace.
Hi guys, thanks for having me. I am a epic fantasy, romantic fantasy author. I published my first series last year, and I have a new one coming out in April, so I'm excited.
Excellent.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, it's so nice to meet all of you and to hear about kind of your general writing. And now we'll kind of dive in and talk specifically about morally gray characters. Since all of you, have experience writing morally gray characters. But before we move just into writing morally gray characters, I do have a question for y'all as readers, because a lot of authors are also voracious readers themselves, we know. So, who is your favorite morally gray character that you read in someone else's book? And I'm going to go reverse order here. So, I'm going to start with JM and tell us who is a favorite morally gray character that you read in someone else's book.
It's hard to choose one, but I really love Cardan from The Cruel Prince. It would be a toss-up between him and Geralt of Rivia from The Witcher.
Very nice. Lexi, what about you? Do you have a favorite morally gray character from someone else's book?
I have so many, but I think, and this is super, controversial, I'm sure. I feel like Snape is probably one of my favorites because you don't see it coming until the very end. So he's a very different type of morally gray character because for 5 books, he's just gray and black. And then all of a sudden, when you start to see his backstory, you realize that there's different levels of these morally gray characters. They don't just have to be split 50-50 the whole time.
Yeah, that's a good point. We talked about motivations there, how they can do a lot for morally gray characters. So definitely seeing Snape's motivations help us understand him. Marlena, what about you? Do you have a favorite morally gray character from someone else's book?
I was going to say Snape as well. I remember going to the release day for the last book and everyone had a pro or anti-Snape tag on. And if that isn't the definition of a great character, I don't know what is.
It's like that Venn diagram, half pro, half good, half bad. There you go.
Yep. Everyone had an opinion and it wasn't going to be found out the last book, which was great.
Very nice. And last but not least, Amy, do you have a favorite morally gray character that you've read in someone else's book?
Of course, I have to. I'm on this panel. I'm here for the morally gray characters. Yeah, I couldn't pick, so I had to pick my top 2. And the first one actually probably some Robin Hobb fans would find extremely controversial because I consider Fitzchivalry Farseer, the main character in Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderling series, I consider him morally gray because he's a prince, a bastard prince who was an assassin, trained to be as an assassin as he grew up. And, assassins do lots of morally gray things at the behest of his king, but he also tries to do the right thing. And especially in the last trilogy, he's so torn all the time. And I was like, oh, this is delicious morally grayness. So I really enjoyed that. And then my close second, this would be my YA morally gray character, is Baz from Rainbow Rowell's Simon Snow series, because he's totally opposed to the main character, but then totally falls in love with the main character. And it was just, chef's kiss.
I like it. I like that we had some that picked more than one. Sometimes you just can't pick a favorite.
We can't decide more than
exactly. I like that. Well, now that we've heard, what you enjoy reading, it's time to kind of dive into your writing. So I'm going to mix it up here. I'm going to start with Marlena and go ahead and tell us about a favorite morally gray character that you yourself have written.
So Tegan from the Stolen trilogy that I have is Fairy, and he is always speaking in riddles, of course, because that's what, Fae do. He also is, one minute he's very kind, very helpful, but the next minute he's doing really horrible things to people in the city. And at some point, the protagonist, Chalet, is okay, are you just trying to put on a show for me here? Or are you really actually trying to hurt these people? And I can't figure out what side you're on. And I just love playing with that kind of expectation with characters and just letting them do what they'll do. And you find out that he is you know, he's in the middle. He's not super good and he's not super bad, but he's got some major flaws. And I think that's really important for a gray character to kind of embrace that to some extent.
Embrace their flaws.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Very nice. I like that. Embrace the flaws. That could be a takeaway from today's session, whatever you're writing your morally great characters.
That's just like good motivation in general, even for us as humans. Embrace your flaws. I love that.
Okay.
I like it. Embrace your flaws. Amy, what about you? Who is your favorite morally gray character that you have written?
So it's really funny because at first I thought in my series I only had one, which is the one of the outlaws mages named Jack DeWitt, and he's this like to start off the series, he punches the main character in the face. So you're like, oh my gosh, this guy's bad. Like he looks like an antagonist at first, but as the book goes through, you see he's really got this like little mushy marshmallow center inside that he doesn't let others see, but comes out through the narrative, and I just like love that. And like he's always trying to be very prickly on the outside, but he's like really a good guy despite being super violent and, you know, rash and reckless and all these things. So he was like a definite one. But then my beta readers, when they're reading my third book, when I got the notes back, one of them was like, ooh, like Jefferson did some really morally gray stuff here and I love it. And I was like, he did? He's morally gray? And I was like, you're right, he is morally gray. No wonder I love him. So I thought that was hilarious.
Have any of the other authors, have y'all had the same situation where you're like, oh, I'm writing this morally gray character and another one sneaks up on you and you're like, ooh, didn't mean to do that? Yeah?
Yeah.
JM, I saw you nod your head first.
Some just turn into straight villains. They take on a life of their own sometimes, you know?
They totally do.
I tend to have villains that like do things that are anti-villain like partway through because things change and they're like, oh, maybe I need to like not be a jerk about things for a little while. Oh no, being a jerk is actually making things worse for me. Oh no, you know.
Ooh, I love that realization.
And Lexi, I saw you nod your head too. You've had some characters you didn't intend to be morally gray come out.
Yeah, I've had a bunch, and then I've had a bunch too that just in my head when the story starts, they are not the protagonist and they are maybe just morally gray. And as the series go, so maybe not over the course of a book, but as the series go, I'm like, you're actually not a good guy after all. You were just kind of hiding. And then I've had some some antagonists become protagonists throughout a series as well, where they became morally gray as the series went and kind of had to win people over.
Very interesting. I like that. I like that you can kind of start in the middle and like JM go to villain route, or Lexi, you know, go all the way to the protagonist, to the good guy route. So that's kind of fun when you start with a morally gray character. You don't really know the path they're going to take. JM, what about you? You know, can you tell us about a specific favorite morally gray character that you've written from one of your books?
Well, my new series has my favorite, but I don't want to give too much away. So I'll talk about Captain Thorsten. He's actually from the novella that I wrote alongside my series, The Legacy of Darkness. And he's like privateer turned pirate turned just drunk. So when we meet him, he's in a fight. He's like in the mud and, you know, bloody and stuff. And then he's like has to go on this mission because of the king gives him no other choice. But it was fun to play with him because he's got this like hard exterior, but then you start to see what really matters to him, even if he's not ready to admit it, which is his crew, who is basically his family. And I especially like him because I give him credit for making my main character in A Legacy of Darkness a little bit morally gray at the beginning. Like she likes to gamble. She doesn't want responsibility. So he kind of set her up for me for when she's forced to go on this quest. And she's like, I really liked my morally gray life with these guys. Do I really have to like do the responsible thing now? So yeah, I have a place in my heart for him.
Very fun. I like that too. Like, oh, I have to leave the morally gray lifestyle and become a hero. Okay, I guess so if I have to. Lexi, what about you? Do you have a favorite morally gray character that you've written?
I do, and I feel like he's probably my favorite character overall, which is bad for me to say. But he started out as he was the protagonist of book 1, but he was a nightmare demon, and he was basically enslaved to the Queen of Hell at the point in time because he'd lost some gambling debt.
Mm-hmm.
And he had to steal to give nightmares to humans to basically pay off his debt so that they would do bad deeds and then wind up as their souls in hell with her.
Mm-hmm.
And as he goes, he finds his soulmate and realizes that he can't do these things if he wants her to care about him.
Mhm.
And after the book ended, all of a sudden he's somehow almost the main character in the other 7 books. And they are very episodic. He is not really even supposed to be there, but somehow he is. And somehow he's always still the anti-hero. No matter how far he comes, he always reverts back to what he's been for 1,200 years and then has to climb his way back out again.
Mm.
Great characters sure do love to steal the spotlight in books, don't they? Oh my gosh.
Yes,
I
they
was
certainly
not
do.
prepared. It was only the 2nd book I'd ever written. So when he started popping up, I was like, what is going on? Your story is done, dude.
So, but both of my morally gray characters, they weren't even in like the original like first draft of my book. They were just like, hey, I'm here now. So that must be like a morally gray character thing too.
Have y'all had that too, where they kind of like they weren't part of your original plans and they kind of insert yourself, not just new ones that come up, but just in general. Maybe you write a character, shove them off to the side, and they keep popping back up later on in your writing.
I meant to shove them to the side and they just refuse to go. So, then I got to move the plot around for them. I'm like, okay, guess you're going to find a spot in here. Come on.
Well, and I even had readers who were like, wait, we need more of him. So then I bring him into another book. And now I'm like, should I write a whole series? Because he's lovable, I guess.
I love it. I mean, as a reader, I love to latch on to characters that I love. And I love seeing, especially nowadays with Twitter and TikTok, there's such a fun book community where you can really share that love and communicate with authors and say, like, give us more. We want more of this character. It's so much fun how that works nowadays with the interaction among readers and authors and everything. Okay, so we've talked about our favorite morally gray characters we've read and written. So let's get a little bit more into the nitty gritty of writing the morally gray characters. So how do you develop your morally gray characters? And when do you know that you have that right balance between negative and positive traits as you're developing them? When do you know, like, not really a villain, not really a hero. This one is definitely morally gray. So how do you develop them? And how do you know that you have the right balance of negative and positive in there? Lexi, I'll start with you. So how do you develop your morally gray characters? And when do you know you've hit that right balance?
I'm going to be totally honest with you. I don't develop them at all. They're just kind of there. Most of the times I know they're coming at me because I can, I've thought it because they give me their backstory and their front story and all of their arcs at once. But I don't think I've ever actually sat down and been like, okay, this is the character he needs to have, or he or she needs to be this, this, and this. And for the balance, I think it's really when I start to care about them as I'm writing, when I start to realize that, like, I'm concerned when they're getting themselves in these positions, when maybe in the beginning I was kind of like, you're kind of a jerk. I don't really care what happens to you. Go redeem yourself. But I don't necessarily have like a plottable answer for that, unfortunately.
No, that's okay. I know. Are any of y'all pantsers where you just kind of right off the seat of Amy? Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. So we have pantsers, we have planners, we have plantsers there in the middle. So whatever way you write it, we ask how you develop it. That's how you develop it. It works. Is anybody else similar where they just don't really plan their morally gray characters? They just kind of happen to you?
Go ahead,
Marlena. Go ahead.
I'm just going to say that some characters just kind of surprise me that they end up being gray because I've written them off as a total villain and I don't really care what happens to them past a certain point. And I'm like, oh no, that's not what that's not their storyline. They're not done yet. And then others, especially like in the Stolen series, we have a whole like reveal character who's actually manipulating and puppeteering everything in the background. And, you don't realize it until all the way to the very end of the first book in the series. It's a shock, but that's been happening the whole book. And then the rest of the series is, okay, what is this gray character going to do now? Are they going to be staying, on that side? Are they going to be shifting their morals around? I like to kind of play around with morals shifting over time. And as the character evolves, do their morals change? Or do they stay the same? Or do they dig in their heels into being super, bad?
And Amy, I know you had said you were about to say something about morally gray characters sneaking up on you instead of developing them.
Yeah. So because I'm a discovery writer, they just kind of appear and they're like, hey, I'm here doing my thing now. And I really like live the online meme I've seen where pretty much where the authors are like, I'm just writing the instant report for my characters as they go and do all these ridiculous things. Like, that's pretty much what I do. Like, for Jefferson, who's the one I didn't even realize was morally gray until book 3, even though I should have been able to tell from the things he was doing. Like, he was supposed to be an antagonist. He came in and he was like, no, I don't want to be an antagonist. I actually want to be the love interest to the main character. So that's what I'm going to do. And he was supposed to be a throwaway character because, like, I just went to a random name generator and I'm like, okay, Jefferson, that's good enough. And I have literally tried to rename him, which became its own like storyline. That's what went into book 2 and into book 3, which actually made a really cool storyline. But like, he's like, no, my name is Jefferson. You may hate my name, but that is my name. And I'm like, oh my God, I have to deal with you. So yeah, he just like forced himself in and he's like, I'm here. You have to deal with me now.
And that's such a morally gray character thing to do, though. This is my name. No, you can't change it.
Yeah, I tried so hard to change it and he refuses. And I'm like, oh my God. Okay. But people seem to like him and he's growing on me. Well, I like him. I just hate his name, but we're going to do it.
And now, JM, I saw you be like, kind of like mine sneak up on me. Are you more of a plan them ahead of time, kind of know what their balance of traits is ahead of time person?
So I don't really like plan out my plot, but I do plan out my characters pretty extensively. Like, I know their love language, I know their astrology sign, and none of that's in the book, but I know it. So if I feel like I have a character that I want to be morally gray, and I might feel him tipping a little too far towards hero or too far towards villain, I kind of balance it out. I have to make sure, like, if he's leaning too far towards a villain or unlikable, I have to give him some redeeming qualities. I've got to give him a weakness, especially that the reader can relate to, because I want them to empathize with him and not write him off as unsavable or, not worthy of being with the hero, because usually my morally gray characters are sort of trying to help the hero. They might not be doing a good job of it. And I like to do it. I like to show these qualities through their relationships, because I'm very much like a found family. I love a found family trope. So I like to have my morally gray characters in that situation where they're forced to be like into a relationship, maybe not romantic, and then someone points out that weakness for my reader. And
I like that if they're going too far villain, you show a weakness, create some empathy in there. I like that. That's a unique way of doing it I hadn't thought of. I was just thinking, okay, positive traits, not necessarily humanize them, make us sympathize with them. That's a good way of looking at it.
I found that I use trauma a lot, especially my horror books, to, have them change their perspective quite a bit. When they've gone through a traumatic event, like monsters attack or something, and suddenly they're like, oh, I'm not the top of the food chain anymore. Suddenly their whole perspective shifts. And then you start to feel kind of bad for them, because you're like, wow, they did go through something horrible. They're a total jerk, but they did go through something horrible. And they're kind of, understanding that they have to change if they're going to survive or adapt to the world around them.
And that's a good point about trauma. Like, well, I always traumatize my characters because, that's what we authors do. But like with my morally gray characters, as you go through the narrative and learn what made them morally gray, it's past trauma. So like they're like a trauma sandwich pretty much. So that trauma is delicious.
And the trauma makes them that marshmallow core inside. Now, JM brought up something interesting that I kind of want to ask the rest of the authors. So I know you said you plan out like their astrology sign and things that are never going to show up in your book. Do y'all have quirks for your characters? Do the other authors have quirks for your characters that you know that's probably not going to end up in the book, but you know this about your character? Anybody feel free to share if you have one.
I know their favorite the colors, but like there's like character interviews you can do, but my characters never want to take those interviews. They're like, well, my favorite color is yellow, so you can like make sure that I have like, you know, a yellow coat, but I never really come out. Well, one character you find out his favorite color is yellow, it's one of my morally gray characters. So he likes yellow because it's cheerful. It was hilarious for him because he's the really grumpy outlaw. Yeah, so like they don't tell me a lot of things. Like it just comes up as I'm writing and they're like, oh, by the way, this quirky thing about me.
I don't keep track of their quirks as much, but I do write really lengthy character sheets. I think JM, you were mentioning how you like understand the characters really well. You don't necessarily plot everything, but you do understand your characters super well ahead of time. And that really resonated with me with what I do. But yeah, I make sure that they're fully fleshed out, and that may involve detailing what happened to them, what trauma led to them being the way that they are, and you know what they've been through that either made them stronger or broke them down, to help me kind of get into their head a little bit whenever I'm writing them.
Lexi, what about you? Do you have any fun quirks that you know about your characters?
It kind of depends upon the character. A lot of times I feel like that stuff winds up getting on the page in like witty banter between characters. But there's definitely those character interviews and then some like character guidebooks that I always fill out before I get started. So there's definitely a lot of details there, but I feel like a lot of them do wind up inside the stories more often than not.
Sometimes I'll use those things for like, I'll have a quote or something they would say, and that kind of is my driving, you know, motivation for them, or their driving goal, you know, or something that's metaphorical for them, something that I can kind of lean into whenever I'm trying to think, okay, how would they respond to this happening?
Is that a quote that they would say, or like a quote from a famous person?
Sometimes
or something
it's a
that
quote
they
that they would say, and sometimes it's a quote from like a famous person. I have a character in the Stolen series that I loosely based off of Boudica. And so I have a quote from her as like, that's what my character's quote is. Of course, she wouldn't say that, but you know, it's a driving force behind her motivation for things. So.
And if anybody watching this doesn't know who Boudica is, she's pretty awesome part of history. Go home and look her up. You know, it's Women's History Month. She's not one that often comes up, but she is pretty cool. So go research the history of Boudica.
Go check out some books from your library about her, or
There
access
you
to
go.
library resources, you know.
There you go. Okay, so we've talked about kind of how you develop your morally gray characters, but a lot of you talked about you know, you create this backstory, or you create a weakness, create empathy for your character. So how do you reveal your morally gray character's motivations or backstory in your writing? Do you just get it out there all at once? Does it happen over time throughout your story? Does it, even if you're writing series, does it pop up in book one, or do we not learn maybe about their backstory? Like some of you mentioned Snape. Do we not learn until book 4, 5, 6 what their motivation is? So how do you reveal your morally gray character's motivations and backstory in your writing? All at once, over time, first book, third book? When does it happen for you? Let's kick it off with Amy.
So for me, it kind of depends on the character, and because I am a discovery writer, like I don't do like the series arcs or like any kind of arcs. Like it's all just wild. But it's funny because they do end up having arcs, which is very interesting. So for one of the characters, I write fantasy, so I try really hard not to info dump. So I try to have it come out through the narrative. So that's how you find out that one of the characters had a very tortured life where he was pretty much like enslaved for his magic, and he escaped, and that's why he's bitter and grumpy. And he had other traumatic things happen that I won't say because they're spoilers for his character if people haven't read the books and are going to read the books. But you really see like over the narrative why he is like he is. And then the other character, Jefferson, like I've had stuff come out in book 3 that, because I'm a discovery writer, he's learning about things as I'm learning about things. And we're like, oh, that's why this thing happened in book 1 like that I didn't know. But there was a secret antagonist that was like a puppet master pulling the strings that none of us knew about. And you'd think I should know about it because I'm the author, but I don't. Like, we're just discovering it together, and it's cool like that. But I make it work somehow. So I discover with the characters as we're going, which is a heck of a lot of fun. Like there was a TikTok meme a while ago where readers are like, "Oh, I can't wait to see what happens in your next book," and the authors are like, "Me too. I can't wait to find out what happens next."
Okay, I like that. You discover along with your characters, discover and reveal the backstory and motivations along with them as they reveal it to you.
Mm-hmm.
Marlena, what about you? How do you reveal your morally great characters' motivations and backstory in your writing?
It depends on how dramatic the character is.
Oh.
If they're super dramatic, then they just do one big, hey, I'm actually doing this, haha, you know. And I've had one character that in book 1, they switched to one side, and then by book 3, they switched to the other side, you know. And it really depends. Other characters, like the protagonist, has to pull them kicking and screaming into not being a jerk, to pull them out of being, you know, totally more on the evil side and back into the gray spectrum with their actions, you know. So it really depends on the character, and if I have like an overall plot arch for a series that I'm working with, or if I'm doing more like Amy does with the discovery writing. So I write in both ways. It just depends on what works for the books that I'm working on currently.
Mm-hmm. I like the idea of a dramatic character that just comes along and says, "This is me, just so you know, FYI, this is going on."
They're pulling off the Scooby-Doo mask and masking them.
Yep. Sometimes that's just what they want to do. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be really weird. And they're like, no, I'm going to do it. I'm like, okay, then we'll do that.
JM, what about you? How do you reveal your morally great character's motivation and backstory?
I definitely like to draw it out. That way, you know, the reader is like on this little discovery ride with the other characters who also don't know yet that they're just morally gray and not totally gray, like totally bad. I've used things like flashbacks, rumors, because I do a lot of like royalty and you know, so the court gossip is a good way to reveal these things, and then the reader still doesn't really know, because what can you trust and what can't you?
I like that.
Yeah, I also like a good like villainesque, you know, monologue, like Marlena. And one of my favorites for this series that I'm writing now, or that comes out in April, is like explosive dialogue. You know, my morally gray character in this new book is headed towards like a romantic relationship. Mm-hmm. So they really clash, you know, at the beginning, because she's like, "What are you doing? Like, why aren't you helping me?" type of thing. And then some of it, you know, when he gets so frustrated, he'll admit a little bit, you know, in like the heat of the moment. And so you get little glimpses of that. And then you're like, you know, I wonder if he meant what he said, or if he's just playing her, type of thing.
Okay, Lexi, what about you? So we've kind of heard very interesting, a lot of different things going on. How do you reveal your morally great characters' motivations and backstory in your writing?
It really depends upon the book and the character.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm a planter or not, but I will get the characters being like, "Here's my entire story." I'll outline it and I'll start writing it. And they're like, "Oh, but this also happens. And this also happens. And this too. And oh, wait, I lied. That didn't happen." So a lot of times it'll be narrative, but especially I think because of the romance elements, when I've got the morally great characters, it's coming out in dialogue, similar to how JM said, because they'll get angry and they'll accidentally announce something, or they'll be in the heat of the moment and something will get said that triggers a conversation that has to follow. So I think for me, for the bulk of it, it's definitely dialogue focused for when the other characters find out. But as a reader, it can be sprinkled in both through narrative and sometimes you don't find out. The book I just released last week, The Race, the readers knew the entire time that my morally gray character's entire family had been murdered. It was in the blurb. It was not something that was hidden. But my protagonist, his heroine, didn't find out until almost 2/3 of the way through. And then it completely shifted the entire plot arc because now she had this information she had just kind of thought he was, a rake and a rogue and somebody not to be trusted. And then she has this whole bit of information dumped on her. So I think I surprised the characters more than I probably surprised myself.
That's such an interesting twist, though, with the dramatic irony of the readers know, but the characters don't. Yeah, I like that. All of you have highlighted some really interesting ways of revealing morally gray characters' backstory. Like, all of you have really fun, unique ways of doing that, which was unexpected to me, honestly. I mean, I know authors are all unique, but to have 4 totally different, really interesting ways that you've done it, it's really neat to hear. And I hope it inspires some of the authors and writers listening to this presentation, either live or coming back to the recording, that these are all really unique ways that you can look at revealing your morally gray character's backstory. Now, something that y'all brought up is, we talked about kind of like, do you reveal it over time, all at once? But I noticed that Lexi and JM, y'all had a couple of favorite ways of revealing it, through dialogue, through court intrigue and gossip. Is there kind of a favorite technique that you use to reveal things about your morally gray character, or even to build empathy for them? Is it dialogue? Is it through relationships? Is there a favorite way that you have of revealing things about your morally gray character?
Who's going first?
Anybody can feel free to go first, or I can call names, either one.
I think for me, it's easiest to use relationships. Because just like in real life, certain people bring certain things out in you. So I think it's fun to explore that type of dynamic, especially if you're dealing with, a protagonist who is very much like the hero or heroine of the story. And to see them bringing out a little more information from the morally gray character, I think it's definitely the easiest to do with dialogue.
Dialogue, relationships. Anybody have another technique that they like to use?
So I like to also use, because I write a third person, really close POV. I like to also use like their internal thoughts. Like for Jack, like he'll be like really rude to the main character, and he actually likes the main character. But everyone would think like he's being a jerk to the main character, and on the inside he has these thoughts about like, oh, I feel sorry for him, so I'm going to help him out. But like everyone is like, wow, Jack, like, why are you being so rude and mean to poor Blaze? Like, why are you being a jerk, man? But he's actually going to help him. He just does it in his own grumpy way.
So in my book that I'm re-releasing this month, actually, She-Wolf of Kanta, my protagonist, she thinks she's doing the right thing at the beginning, and then through a series of events realizes that she may not have been doing the right thing, and ends up, being very angry because of it, because she was misled her whole life into believing she was correct. And so by the end of the book, which of course, leads into a series, but by the end of the book, she is much more mean and jaded based on her experience with the world. So, you kind of, as the reader, understand each of the steps of why she's going down the path that she is. She goes from thinking she's been doing the right thing to becoming more of a gray character because of what is revealed to her in the world as, the truth that she once knew is not really the truth. So.
Yeah. Lexi, do you have any favorite technique for revealing?
I don't know if it's a favorite technique, but I don't think anyone has really mentioned it too much. A lot of times my morally gray characters, when they get their own story, I'll end up giving the entire backstory as if it's front story happening present. So what my I don't know if it's a spoiler or not, but it's a finished series for the last 4 years. The Alliance of Silver and Steam, my main antagonist, who I spoke about, the Queen of Hell, winds up having to change sides when the demons come for her. And so we don't know why she is the way she is. She's not Lucifer. And the entirety of the book series, even when we got to her book, we don't know why she is the way she is. And then when I wrote the prequel, the entire story came out. And I found myself doing that a lot now when I've got a morally gray character. Their information's not coming out in their story. It's coming out in the book that came before it, either intentionally or unintentionally. So there's kind of that hope that the readers have either picked up another one or that there's enough clues dropped to really explain that backstory, since it's not always directly in the novel that they're in.
I like
cool.
that.
I like that, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Total
really
accident when it happened.
But that's neat because I remember, I mean, I read the Hunger Games, and then when the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes came out, I read it and I was like, oh my gosh, I understand President Snow so much now. So that's a really cool technique to do that. And I think if you have a really interesting character, readers love that kind of stuff too. Okay, now I'm curious about this one. I wrote this question and I really wanted a chance to ask it. So talking about your inspiration for morally gray characters, have you ever based one of your morally gray characters, or any character really, I'm just curious here, on someone that you know? And if you have, did you tell them that you based your character on them? So have you ever based a morally gray character on someone you know? And did you tell them if you did? Lexi, I'm going to start with you.
I have not. If I know morally great people, I thankfully don't notice it so that I don't put assumptions on them. But my first morally great character did very much come from Hook from Once Upon a Time. So that's probably the closest I go. And readers spotted it out. They were like, oh my gosh, he reminds me of this because, you know, he's only doing things for the girl. And I'm like, I mean, that's kind of a lot of morally great characters, but that's definitely the closest I've ever come. I can't write a character if it's about someone I know, especially the sexy time scenes. It gets very awkward if I use a name, if this character comes to me and they're like, hey, my name's this. And I'm like, oh, there is such a block on you right now because I can't get past your name. And Amy, like your character, they're like, nope, that's my name. Sorry. So I have definitely never written based on anyone I know for any of the characters.
Yeah. It's so funny. Amy, what about you? Have you ever based a morally gray character or, you know, any character on someone that you know? And if so, did you tell them?
So I haven't, which like my husband was really afraid when I started writing that like I was gonna like subconsciously do that because he doesn't understand that like in my head the characters are real. And I mean it's like my kids walking around like I wish I could control my children and their personalities, but I can't. That's how the characters are. So they're just like, I am this way, you have to deal with me now. But the closest I've come is names. And part of it's because like, even though I write fantasy, because of the type of fantasy I write, I still use pretty standard names. So sometimes I just get tired of using like name generators and like the baby name sites. So on TikTok for fun, I was like, hey, if you want to be a character in my book, drop your name in the comments and you might be in book 3 Dreamer. So lots of people did. But then my cousin, she was like, I would love if my husband was the antagonist in your books. I was like, yes, Philip's going to be the antagonist in my book, which is hilarious because he's like the nicest guy ever. So now in my book, he's like this really not nice guy. And we're going to have a good laugh about that. But it's not based on him, but it's got his name and it's going to be hilarious.
That's funny. So he knows, though. He's like, I'm the antagonist. Yeah. I'm cool with that.
He knows that his wife has nominated him to be an antagonist in my book. And he'll probably eventually end up getting killed by one of the main characters.
Spoilers, though. Yeah. JM, what about you? You ever based a morally great character on someone you know?
So usually my morally gray characters are based on like villains or monsters that I've seen in media, like a TV show or movie. And I'm like, oh, but wouldn't it be cool if they had this sort of depth to them, or if they had this backstory, and then people might like them. So that's more my tactic. If I get inspiration from anything. I have based a really annoying character on someone I know, and I will not name him. But I was like, oh yeah, you're going in my book.
I'm guessing you didn't tell them that this annoying character.
No, and that character also did not make it through the end. So definitely not, nothing personal. That character, brought in life.
Hopefully that's the one person that maybe doesn't watch this this stream.
It's not a friend or anything or
Okay.
family. It's
Marlena, what about you? Have you ever based a morally great character on someone you know, and did you tell them?
No. But I do a lot of so I had to do a lot of research on what manipulators and people like that, their tactics for things, because, that was something I wanted my bad guys and some gray characters to do, would be very effective manipulating, gaslighting people. And, you've got to research that kind of stuff to be able to understand what tactics people are actually using. I have an interest in social psychology, so that's something that I really enjoy diving into to find out, okay, how do people deal with this? So is this what kind of tactics would be used here? And I give you this, and so you give me something in return, kind of thing. But no, I've never based it on actual people. I just can't. It would never even occur to me to do that. And if I ever did, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
But that's also why on our copyright page, there's the little blurb about this was not based on anybody, and it's just a coincidence if you think it was. So that covers us.
Okay, so if y'all don't use people from your life, what other inspirations do you look to for your morally gray characters? I know psychology has been mentioned, some TV villains, movie monsters, or what other kind of sources of inspiration do y'all have for your morally gray characters? Amy, go ahead. I saw you start. Go ahead.
Well, for me, I definitely get a lot of inspiration from TV and movies. So one of the characters, Jefferson, when he decided he was going to be a main character, and I was like, okay, he's semi-based on Tony Stark with some of his ego, his wealth, his thinking that his way is always the right way, but he has a really good heart. He means well. He really cares about the main character, who's his love interest. So I really liked those aspects of Tony Stark. So I was like, I'm going to fold them into Jefferson and, of course, make the character my own. But I like to look at, especially with, I know Marvel gets a lot of guff for people are like, oh, they're just action movies, but they're really good at giving their characters depth, especially their morally gray characters. And that's why there are people who are like, Thanos was right. And so it's what other franchise can people be like, this villain who destroyed half the universe was right? Only Marvel could do that. So I really like looking at Marvel to get some inspiration for different things.
Marlena, what about you? Outside psychology, do you have any good sources of inspiration for morally great characters?
Yeah. I look at when I'm writing fairies, for example, or the Fae, you've got a lot of mythology that you can work with, and you've got a lot of the old legends and myths of Irish mythology that they have. So I dug into a lot of that too, and wow, there's some weird tales in those areas. But one of the main things that you always hear in mythology is the kind of double speak that fairies have. And it's important to kind of grasp that. And it just naturally a lot of times turns into gray characters, which you can't really pin down what side they're really on. And I just enjoy that. I also find the gray characters, I like the complexity of them. I like the fact that you can really dig into their heads more. And, I like to think that even my worst villains, they think they're doing the right thing, and they think that they are, in some way, the heroes of their own story. So from their perspective, they're not the bad guy. But I like digging into gray characters because they do walk that line a lot between one good side or bad side.
Yeah, I like the idea of mythology too, because gosh, that is chock full of morally great characters. Lexi, what about you? I know you said Hook was your inspiration from Once Upon a Time, which I love. I loved Once Upon a Time too, so I'm a fan. Is there anything else that you kind of look to for inspiration?
No, I think the big thing is because they come to me with their backstories already done. It's probably subconscious things that I've been picking up, either, reading, walking around. So maybe I do have stuff based on people and I just don't realize it. But I don't, like, there's never really anything that, like, when I wrote my last release, I did not know that his family was dead until after I started writing it. And then it became the central point. And I was like, well, why didn't I know this beforehand? I've never had this happen before. And I think it was just because the character wasn't ready to tell me. So I guess there's probably little things that happen all around me all the time that make it pop out. And I just can't pinpoint anything specifically for inspiration.
But that's a good point. A lot of authors that I've heard speak talk about reading a lot and going out and observing human nature, walking around and watching people and listening to people and eavesdropping on conversations and kind of storing all that in your brain, and it'll come up in your writing. It'll be useful one day, whether you realize it or not. JM, what about you? I know you said like movie monsters, movie villains, stuff like that. Any kind of other sources of inspiration, or is there kind of a movie monster that really heavily inspired you?
I think I would stick with the movies because it's like a game. So if I'm watching a movie and there is a villain that is just like nobody else would like them, I'm a fan. I'm like, I like that character. And they're like, why? Like, he just did this and this and he's horrible. And I'm like, because in my mind, this is his backstory. And so it's almost like a game. Like, how can I like take a character that is so bad and then make him better and make people actually root for him or her? So I think I just have the most fun with that. I do read a lot of mythology and things like that. But it's just so much easier if you're like watching a movie or a TV show and you have this visual and you're like, yeah, like it just starts blooming in your mind. And I'll tell my husband, I'll be like, hang on, I need to put some notes in my phone. And I've like, pretty soon I've got an entire character and his life story plotted out on my phone.
I love that.
Is there now what movie villain, is there one that kind of is your favorite one that you've done this with? I'm curious.
Okay. The first one that comes to mind is Scar from The Lion King.
I love Scar. He's one of my favorites.
I love him. He's so sassy. Or Hades. I do love Hades too. And I think maybe they're in the same boat because I'm thinking like there's like some family trauma. No, they really got the short end of the stick. In my mind, something really must have happened to make Scar as bad as he was. Yeah, so those are the two that come to mind. I'm a mom of toddlers, so a lot of Disney inspiration over here.
I love it though. Maybe like Lexi, we need to have like a Scar prequel. Like what happened to make him so mean? Here's his backstory.
I would totally read or watch that. I loved Scar. He's awesome.
That'd be amazing.
Especially get Jeremy Irons to do the audiobook for us and just keep it going.
So Disney, if you're listening, make it happen.
Hey, and we have authors here who would be totally willing to write that for you as well, Disney. Just putting it forward.
Yep.
Okay. So I think I'm gonna do one last question for everybody. And this is kind of an open-ended and free-for-all in a way. Well, not free-for-all, open-ended. We'll say that. Are there any other tips, tricks for writing morally gray characters that you really want to share? Anything else that you really want to pass along to people who are writing morally gray characters? Something that maybe you wish you would have known when you first started off, or just something that you've picked up along the way that you really want to share. So tips and tricks for writing morally gray characters. Let's start with JM. I'm going to go kind of backwards here.
So one thing I think is to look at like your favorite books, movies, TV shows, and see how they effectively did it. Or if you watched a show and everyone was like, oh, I really liked this character, he wasn't so bad, but you didn't agree. See maybe like why? Because really looking at what people who have come before you have done is going to help you learn the techniques that you need to use, if that makes sense. And then my other one would really be the astrology thing, because it sounds so silly and pointless since you won't use it in your book. But like zodiac signs get really specific about personality traits. And if you can kind of look at that and like, it'll cohesively bring together this character and like bring it to life for you. So, and I think that works for any character, not just morally gray, but I don't know. Like, I feel like my son's a Scorpio. I feel like Scorpios would make morally gray, like perfect morally gray characters.
My husband is one. I'll agree with that.
So it could be fun, and it's just a nice, like doing exercises like that so you can really get to know your characters and their motivations, because that is going to be the driving factor. What are their motivations, and what's driving them to cross the line or stopping them from crossing that line.
Very nice. Lexi, what about you? Any tips or tricks for writing morally great characters?
Not a trick, but a tip is that you have to write the story until you like the character.
Mm-hmm.
You might end up having to pull a bunch of stuff out, but if you've started with a morally gray character and your goal is to make them morally gray enough that people care about them, if you haven't found that plot point that triggers you caring about them, your audience won't either. And I think that was definitely something that I had to learn, not the hard way, but I definitely had to spend a lot of time with it when I switched my antagonist to a protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
I had 4 books to do it, so there was a slow build, but I had to constantly be checking in with people and being like, does this actually matter to anybody but me? Mm-hmm. Because sometimes we're a little too close to our characters and we love them even if they are absolute awful people. So definitely have someone, make sure you care about them, and then have somebody that's non-biased read over it and make sure that you can make them care about it, because by and large, everyone loves morally great characters right now, but they're still very hard to like really make people root for at the end of the day.
Yeah. And Marlena, any tips or tricks for writing morally great characters?
I think really digging into the perspective of your character is a really key factor, and allowing your character to go where they want to go. Even if you're like, no, you're supposed to be like a, straight up paladin like character over here, super straight laced. Why do you want to go over and do this horrible thing? But allowing your character to do those things, to kind of delve into that gray area, to allow them to do the things that you might not have expected them to do. I think that will naturally lead to characters, expressing the complexity and the true gray nature that they might have, that you might not have realized that they had before. And just leaning into that is very helpful.
And Amy, any tips or tricks for writing morally gray characters?
Yeah, so this is something I've kind of learned, because for my first book, I tried really, really hard to be a plotter, and I tried to do Save the Cat. I tried so hard. And then, my characters, took the plot, burned it, threw it off a cliff, stomped on it a few times. They're like, no, we're not doing that. So one of the things I learned, because doing that, and I tried to get it with my second book, and finally my third book, I'm like, no, we're just pantsing it and it's fine. But with the first 2 books, I had some really bad times of writer's block. And I was like, it was frustrating, because it's like, I have this plan. Why isn't the plan working? And it's because I was trying to make the characters, especially the morally gray characters, behave in a way that they wouldn't behave. And readers can tell that if you have the character not behaving true to themselves. And when you change the plot to have the character behave the way they should, is that going to wreck your plot if you're a plotter? Yeah, it is. I'm sorry. But for my books, that took them from being okay to making them so much better, because that character was true to themselves. They made awful decisions that we probably wouldn't make, because we're hopefully not morally gray. But you could also understand why they did it, because they were acting true to themselves. They weren't, 1 minute, being this ruthless person, and the next, oh, let me go walk this old lady across the street. Like, maybe they were stealing her purse while they were walking her across the street in the end. And that wasn't in the plot. So that was one of the things that was a big revelation for me is, I have an idea of what I want the character to do, but as I'm writing it, they're like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm doing this other thing. Then it's like, okay, you're just going to do that and it's fine. And you can make it work.
Mm-hmm. And I do have one more question that came in from Facebook that I do want to sneak in here. Have you guys ever, this is from Selenia, have you guys ever started writing a character and then as time goes on, that character becomes morally gray? So anybody feel free to answer this one. But I see heads nodding all over the place. Have all of you had that situation? Mm-hmm. Yeah. anybody want to share specifically about what happened?
Well, for me, that was what happened with Jack the Outlaw. I thought when he first showed up in like the first chapter, I thought he was one of the antagonists. And there must be like a thing of like you thinking people are going to be an antagonist, but they're like, no, I'm morally gray and I'm an okay guy. But I thought he was going to be an antagonist, and because he's just this awful person at first, the main character thinks that he's about to die from this person, but then like he becomes morally gray and he like actually likes the main character over time. So that was really cool to see. The character growth of morally great characters is just fun to watch too.
I had a villain in The Seeking, Broskow, and just a super jerk, just, you know, intimidating, preps his dogs to go out and hunt people down on one day out of the year when they can do that. And at one point he experiences a really traumatic thing. He loses someone close to him, and it changes him quite a lot. And, you know, at some point I was like, should I let you be changed by this? You know, as the author, you have full control, and you have to decide when you should let go and let your character go where they need to go with that. And he was like, no, this is going to change me as a character. And I was like, okay. So yes, and you just have to allow it to happen, I think.
Well, that is great hopes for writers out there. So if you're writing a character and they're becoming morally gray, either they were the villain and they're getting a little empathetic, or they were the protagonist and they're maybe developing some negative traits in there, that's okay. Just embrace where their character wants to take you. Embrace the flaws. I think that's what we said earlier as one of our takeaways. Well, thank you all so much. It has been so interesting hearing y'all speak about your morally gray characters, hearing all the different ways that you write them, all the wonderful tips, tricks, sources of information that y'all have that our writers listening to this either live or in the recording can turn to. It's been so wonderful hearing you share your expertise. We truly, truly appreciate Marlena Frank, Lexi Ostro, and J.M. Wallace, as well as HCPL's own Amy Campbell, taking the time to share their tips and tricks on writing morally gray characters as authors. And as Amy said in the beginning of the stream, everybody's books should be available through Harris County Public Library's digital book collection, which you can access through either the Libby by Overdrive app or through the website hcpl.overdrive.com. So thank you all so much for joining us today. To our authors, thank you to everyone who's watching this live, to Selenia for our question, a future thank you to those of you who are maybe watching this through the recording, even if you couldn't join us live. We really appreciate everyone coming out today.
And make sure to tune in here next month as we celebrate Camp NaNoWriMo throughout April with a writing program streamed live every Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. So we hope to see more of our viewers then.
Thank you so much. Everyone have a good evening.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.